Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Millennial Project. Last time we talked about how wealthy residents who live below the Hollywood sign are trying to shut off access to the sign because they are tired of having hikers and tourists come through their neighborhood. I took you with me as I tried to access the sign myself, and we all saw how difficult it can be for the average person to actually get there. Whether it's because of misleading Google Maps directions, no parking zones, road barricades, a gate blocking the trailhead in front of the sign, or fencing around the sign itself. But that was just day one. It was just the first step into this massive issue surrounding the Hollywood sign. Since then, I've had the chance to conduct hours of interviews with the people who are most dramatically affected by this Hollywood sign issue. Today, you will get to see the first of these interviews and hear the other side of the story of the residents who live below the sign. In this first interview, you will hear from Sarajane Schwartz. Sarajane is a major player in the ongoing battle over the sign. She has been featured in countless articles, she has mobilized neighborhood voters for local elections, and she is a passionate voice for those who feel that tourism has become untenable in Beachwood Canyon. But before we do hear from Sarajane, I just want to say that if you like what you see today, you can stay up to date with the Millennial Project's latest videos by subscribing to the channel on YouTube or liking the page on Facebook. Also, feel free to share what we're doing with your friends because the show travels by word of mouth, so any supportive shoutouts from viewers are always super helpful. All right, with all that out of the way, let's dive into our fascinating interview with longtime resident and local activist Sarajane Schwartz. All right, I'm ready. Great. Go for it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, why don't we start off? Would you just mind introducing yourself and kind of telling everybody your affiliation with this ongoing Hollywood sign issue?
My name is Sarajane Schwartz. I've been a resident up here for almost 40 years. And in addition to that, at various times, I've served on the Hollywood Land Homeowners Association. I'm currently on the board, and I'm a past two-term president. And I also started my own little organization called Homeowners on Beachwood Drive United, just to deal with the safety issues that have come up in recent years, having to do with the impact of the Hollywood sign on our residents.
So I was wondering if you could just tell us kind of like start to finish what the problem is with the Hollywood sign.
Well, as I said, I've lived up here for almost 40 years, and we never had an issue with the Hollywood sign until relatively recently. It used to be when visitors would come up, they'd be from all over the world, they'd ask, how do you get to the sign? You'd talk to them for about 5 minutes, you'd make friends with them and give them directions, and it would be kind of an interesting experience living up here. But recently, I'd say the past 4 years, the amount of people coming up here has become unsafe. And where we would maybe see a tourist up here that you would talk with and ask directions, maybe, I don't know, twice a week. Now, there's 60, 70 people an hour. So it's just untenable. And it's become that way, I think, for several reasons. First of all, the Hollywood sign is being promoted and commercialized in a way that it never was before. There used to be a Citizens Advisory Board to the sign, which was disbanded. And during those times, there was really a policy that the sign shouldn't be commercialized, that its impact on residents should be protected, and all of that's been thrown out the window. In addition to that, we have the councilman who has recently ended his term, who very actively promoted the sign. He did things we feel that were illegal. And finally, there's the development of the internet that has also advertised and promoted the sign from people who come to visit. So all of those things have come together to make the situation here not only, as we feel, illegal, but unsafe. And people have to understand that all of this is set in a setting of a very high fire hazard zone. Our neighborhood juts out further into the park than any other neighborhood. We're surrounded by combustible parkland on 3 sides. We're a bottleneck. So it's a very fragile area in addition to everything else. And another big concern that we have, being a high fire area, is the smoking. It's a big issue. And I tell people all the time, put out your cigarettes. Please put out your cigarettes, because it is illegal to smoke here. And I should not be in the position of having to police people up here. That's not my job. People aren't always happy that that goes on. So the other thing up here that is dangerous is the congestion that all of the cars cause. We had a fire here about 10 years ago where the resident died, which is pretty unusual nowadays for people to die in house fires. And they died because our streets are so narrow that the fire department had a very difficult time maneuvering on the streets. And now conditions are so much worse. So the congestion is a very serious problem up here. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, earlier this year, the park had an experimental program for 3 weeks during spring break where they tried to divert a lot of the traffic away from our neighborhood. And their car count was 160,000 cars in 3 weeks, with an average of 3 people each in them. So these are the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And I don't know how any little neighborhood without any infrastructure, without sidewalks, with narrow streets, is supposed to absorb this. It attracts so many people, and it's 365 days a year. We don't get Christmas off or holidays. In fact, those are really busy times. So they have to shut this down.
So as long as we're kind of at this spot, I thought what would be interesting is if you could just talk a little bit about what it's like when you walk outside your door, like on a busy day.
Well, some days you don't even have to. Some days you don't even have to walk outside your door because people knock on your door and ask to use the bathroom, strangers. Or I've had people that don't ask and have urinated across the street. One person brought a pot and defecated in my driveway, but. It's terrible, and it's terrible that you open up the door and you see somebody after they've had a nice hike standing and lighting up a cigarette right next to your house. And you have to go out and tell them to put their cigarette out, that it's illegal. And some people listen and some people ignore you. And it's scary sometimes, and as my husband says, you know, you confront these people in front of our house and they know where we live. And even last week somebody threatened me and said, look, I know where you live. And I shouldn't have to live like that. It's not fair to anyone. And it's very upsetting to see, particularly on the weekends. I mean, I see, but every day, you know, huge numbers of people walking in the street.
Right,
walking in the
street. Just to clarify, there are no sidewalks. So you're saying there are people at best in the street, but on the side, and at worst,
many people,
you have kids like me,
there
five abreast in the street.
Yeah,
right?
no, a lot of that, because they feel they're already in the park. That this neighborhood is a part of the park, people play music. Just a couple of days ago, people were playing football in the street. As they were walking up, they were tossing a football around. I mean, this has become a big amusement park. Disneyland, or any amusement park, would be shut down in 30 seconds if this was the amount of supervision that you have, which pretty much is nothing. I mean, it's totally out of control. So we're talking about an issue that we feel is illegal, and even if it were legal, it's unsafe. And you think, not the residents, but the city would be the one rushing to close this down because of the huge liability.
I was curious, as you know, since you kind of summarized the issue so clearly, if you could just kind of segue now right into what do you feel is a solution, and where would you like to funnel people specifically?
Well, I think this should be closed immediately, because we know it's dangerous and it's not working. You don't send people to where they don't have the proper infrastructure or supervision. And then the city can figure out, do they want to make money from the sign? How do they want to promote the sign? They can build a visitor center if they want and start charging people. There were talks about maybe a tram, but it would have to come from the backside of the hill. And if we want to close access to the sign here, there's other places where people can access the very same trails to reach the sign that are legal, that are safe, and that have infrastructure. So we're not trying to keep people out of the park. I mean, it's up to the city and the citizens to decide, do they really want all of these people hiking to the sign? Where no one is vetted, people can approach this big landmark with backpacks the size of people backpacking for months in the backwoods. I mean, I don't know of any other landmark that's treated this way, particularly in the kind of era of terrorism we live. And so what we're maintaining again is that if the city wants all these people up here, which I don't know if I would agree with, but if they do, fine. They can access all these trails from where there's infrastructure, where it's legal, and that's why you have infrastructure there. That's why there's parking lots and water and bathrooms over at Canyon Drive.
And this is where the Bronson Canyon.
We're at Bronson Canyon because that's always been the legal entrance to the park and to access these trails. And that's why you have all that stuff there. And that's why there's nothing here. And so we say, fine, just send them there. Close this off. You won't hear from us again. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want inside the park as long as it doesn't impact us.
So what for you is illegal about the Beachwood Drive trailhead or entrance to the park?
All right. That's a very good question. This area was developed in the 1920s. And at the end of the street was a road that dead-ended at the stables. And the stables has been there from the 1920s. It's a historic stables. And that was their road. So there never was access from the streets. The only access was from the stables. You have a councilman, though, that on his own, Councilman Labange, he decided he would take over the existing road that led to the stables, which is the stables easement, and he would just put in more parking up there, that he would put in a switchback to access the trail that way, and it was done without any notification, any public hearing, any process. It was just done because that's what he wanted to do. And the city even removed the parking lot at the earlier part of this year, saying that there should have been an EIR and that it's illegal. But so far they have refused to say that about the entrance, which is just as illegal, and they were put in at the same time. And the stables right now is suing the city, saying that's our road. We are responsible for the road. We have liability insurance, and you've taken over our road, and we have thousands of people walking up it, and you're interfering with our business.
I wanted to ask you last about the recent election. What I'm curious about is that the more I'm talking to people, the more it seems as though this Hollywood sign issue was a very large determinant of this election.
We worked very hard. I personally worked very hard. I mean, first I did a voter registration campaign to make sure people were registered, and then I worked hard for them to vote for David Rue. So we made a decision, and this was a huge upset. I think it's only happened twice in the history of Los Angeles where you had the establishment candidate lose. I mean, this was a big deal. And a lot of this was because we worked to get David Rue in so that he could stop these policies. And so far, and he made promises and kept saying he would put safety first. And if he really does that, if he really puts safety first, and it's not just rhetoric, then we'll be satisfied with that, because that means all of this has to be closed down because it's unsafe. But so far, it's been a big question mark. He's increased some of the supervision up here, but it's really just a Band-Aid. So it's a big question mark what's going to happen, and we've been waiting and waiting and waiting.
And do you feel like you have access to his office, that they listen to you, that they will respond to your calls, your emails, that kind of stuff? I mean, do you feel like you worked for this guy, you helped get him elected.
Right.
It sounds the most
I would say mixed.
Mixed?
Yeah, in some ways disappointing.